The sun blazed mercilessly over the Arizona desert as Samuel McCready guided his horse through the rocky canyon. Sweat dripped from his weathered face, leaving dark stains on his faded blue shirt. He had been tracking stolen cattle for 3 days now, following hoof prints that seemed to dance across the harsh landscape like ghostly shadows. His ranch, the Double M, stretched across thousands of acres, but rustlers had been picking off his livestock for weeks. As the sole owner and operator since his father's death 2 years ago, Samuel couldn't afford to lose even a single head of cattle. The 42-year-old rancher had built his reputation on determination and fairness. Unlike many of his neighbors who viewed the Apache people as nothing more than savages to be driven away, Samuel had always believed in treating everyone with respect. His father had taught him that the land belonged to those who understood it best, and the Apache had lived here for countless generations. Still, business was business, and whoever was stealing his cattle needed to be stopped. As he rounded a bend in the canyon, Samuel's horse suddenly reared up, whinnying in alarm. Before he could calm the animal, shadows emerged from behind the red rock formations. Apache warriors, their faces painted with traditional markings, surrounded him with the silence of desert winds. Their leader, a stern-faced man with graying hair braided down his back, pointed a rifle at Samuel's chest. Samuel raised his hand slowly, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "I'm not here for trouble," he said, looking directly into the leader's dark eyes. "I am tracking stolen cattle. That's all." The Apache leader spoke in his native tongue to the other warriors. Samuel caught only fragments, having learned a few words during trading visits to the reservation years ago. The conversation seemed heated, with gestures pointing toward him and then deeper into the canyon. "You are on sacred ground, white man," the leader finally said in heavily accented English. "This place is forbidden to your kind." Samuel looked around, noticing for the first time the ancient pictographs carved into the canyon walls and the carefully arranged stones that formed what appeared to be ceremonial circles. His stomach sank as he realized he had unknowingly trespassed on a holy site. "I didn't know," Samuel said honestly. "I was following tracks. If I've shown disrespect, it wasn't intentional." The leader studied him for a long moment, then spoke again to his warriors. 2 of them moved forward and took Samuel's rifle and sidearm. Another grabbed the reins of his horse. Samuel remained perfectly still, knowing that any sudden movement could mean his death. "You will come with us," the leader announced. "The council will decide your fate." They bound his hands with rawhide and led him deeper into the canyon, following paths that seemed invisible to Samuel's eyes. The Apache moved like water flowing around rocks, making no sound despite the loose gravel and scattered stones. Samuel's boots crunched loudly with each step, marking him clearly as an outsider in this ancient landscape. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a hidden valley that took Samuel's breath away. Nestled between towering red cliffs was a village unlike anything he had ever seen. Traditional wickiups made of bent poles and brush dotted the valley floor, smoke rising gently from cooking fires. Women in long skirts and colorful blouses moved gracefully between the dwellings, tending to children and preparing food. Elder men sat in the shade, working on weapons and tools with practiced hands. What struck Samuel most was the absence of young and middle-aged men. Apart from his captors, who he now realized were likely the village's remaining warriors, the population consisted almost entirely of women, children, and elderly people. His heart ached as he understood the implications. Recent conflicts with the U.S. Army and raids by other tribes had clearly taken a heavy toll on this community. The leader, who Samuel would later learn was named Joaquin, brought him before a circle of elder women seated on woven mats beneath a large ramada. These women, Samuel realized, were the true power in this village. Their weathered faces spoke of wisdom earned through hardship, and their eyes held the weight of difficult decisions made for the survival of their people. The oldest woman, her gray hair braided with turquoise beads, rose slowly to her feet. She wore a dress of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork and a necklace of silver and turquoise that caught the late afternoon light. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Joaquin translated her words. "Grandmother Ayana says you have violated sacred ground. She asks why your life should be spared." Samuel thought carefully before responding. He knew his next words might determine whether he lived or died, but More than that, they would reveal the kind of man he truly was. I came here following the tracks of my stolen cattle. He began, looking directly at Ayana, even though she might not understand his English. My ranch provides food and livelihood for many families, both white and Mexican. When cattle are stolen, everyone suffers. But I also know that your people are hungry. I've seen the way government supplies fail to reach the reservation on time, if at all. Joaquin translated, and Samuel watched as the Council of Women exchanged glances. Ayana spoke again, her tone sharp and questioning. She wants to know if you're like the other white men who promise much, but deliver only empty words, Joaquin said. Samuel nodded slowly. I understand her doubt. Many of my people have broken their promises to yours. But I've never made promises I couldn't keep. I've traded fairly with Apache people before. I've never cheated anyone, red or white, out of what they were owed. As Joaquin translated, Samuel noticed a younger woman standing at the edge of the circle. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long black hair that shone like polished obsidian and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. Unlike the others, she wore no jewelry, and her simple cotton dress suggested she held no special rank. Yet something about her bearing commanded respect. The young woman stepped forward and spoke to Ayana in rapid Apache. Samuel caught the word nailnish, which he thought meant to work. Joaquin's eyebrows rose slightly, and he engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with the other warriors. Finally, Ayana raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her words were measured and deliberate. Grandmother Ayana has decided, Joaquin announced. You will not be killed today, but you cannot leave either. You have seen our village, our numbers, our weaknesses. Until the council determines what to do with you, you will remain here as our prisoner. Samuel felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by concern for his ranch. His foreman, Miguel, would eventually come looking for him, but Samuel had told no one exactly where he was going. It could be days or even weeks before anyone found his trail. What about my cattle? Samuel asked. And my ranch? People depend on me. Ayana spoke again, and this time her tone held a hint of what might have been amusement. She says your cattle are safe, Joaquin translated. They graze in good pasture with water nearby. As for your ranch, perhaps it is time you learned what it means to depend on the mercy of others. That evening, Samuel found himself seated beside a small fire, his hands still bound but his feet free. A teenage boy brought him a bowl of stew made with venison, beans, and corn. The food was simple but delicious, seasoned with wild herbs that gave it a flavor unlike anything from his ranch kitchen. As he ate, Samuel observed the daily life of the village. Children played games with stones and sticks, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls despite the hardships their families faced. Women worked together to prepare food, mend clothing, and care for the elderly. There is a sense of community here that Samuel had rarely seen among his white neighbors, where each family tended to keep to themselves. The young woman he had noticed during his trial approached his fire. She carried a water jug made from fired clay and a clean cloth. Setting them down beside him, she spoke in careful English. You are hurt, she said, pointing to a cut on his forehead that Samuel had forgotten about. It must have happened when his horse reared up during his capture. It's nothing, Samuel replied, surprised by her concern for his welfare. She ignored his protest and began cleaning the wound with gentle but efficient movements. Her touch was soft, but her hands were calloused from hard work. This close, Samuel could see that her eyes held depths of sadness that seemed far too old for her face. What's your name? He asked quietly. She paused in her ministrations. Itzel, she said finally. It means rainbow. I am Samuel Mtsekrigi. I own the Double M ranch about 20 miles southwest of here. Itzel nodded, then continued tending his wound. I know your ranch, she said. You pay fair wages to Mexican workers. You do not cheat them like others do. Samuel was surprised she knew this about him. How do you know about my workers? My cousin Maria works for a rancher near yours. She hears things. She says you are not like most white men. When she finished cleaning his cut, Itzel sat back on her heels and studied his face. Why did you really come to this sacred canyon? The truth. Samuel met her gaze steadily. I told the truth. Someone has been stealing my cattle. I found tracks leading into the canyon, so I followed them. I didn't know it was sacred ground, and I'm sorry for the disrespect. You think we stole your cattle? I don't know what to think. The tracks were there, leading this way. But seeing your village, seeing how your people live, Samuel shook his head. You have no way to drive cattle out of this valley without being seen. And you have no need for live cattle when you could more easily hunt deer or rabbits. Etzel was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice so low Samuel had to lean forward to hear her. The tracks you followed were not made by our people, but they were made by someone who wanted you to follow them here. Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool desert evening. What do you mean? There are men who want your ranch, Samuel McCready. Bad men who will do anything to drive you away or make you sell cheap. They know you are a fair man who would not attack Apache people without cause. So they steal your cattle and make trails that lead to us. How do you know this? Etzel glanced around to make sure they were not being overheard. Because 3 days ago, these same men came to our village. They offered to buy cattle from us, good money for animals we might find wandering loose. When our warriors refused, they threatened to bring soldiers to destroy our village. Samuel felt anger building in his chest, not at the Apache people, but at whoever was trying to manipulate him into becoming their weapon against innocent people. Did you recognize any of these men? One had a scar across his neck like a necklace. Another was very fat with gold teeth. The leader wore expensive clothes, but had cruel eyes. The description of the scarred man immediately brought a face to Samuel's mind. Jack Brennan, a gunfighter who worked for whoever paid him best. If Brennan was involved, this was more serious than simple cattle rustling. Etzel, Samuel said urgently. You have to tell Joaquin what you just told me. Your people are in danger. She shook her head. The warriors already know. That is why they were watching the canyon entrances. They expected someone to come following the false trail. Then, why didn't they tell me this during the trial? Etzel's eyes held a mixture of sadness and pragmatism that struck Samuel to his core. Because even if you're a good man, you're still a white man. And white men's words often change when they return to their own people. It is safer to keep you here until we know for certain what kind of man you truly are. Samuel understood the logic, even as it frustrated him. The Apache had been betrayed too many times to take any chances, no matter how genuine his intentions might seem. That night, Samuel lay on a buffalo robe beside the dying fire, staring up at more stars than he had ever seen from his ranch house. The desert sky stretched endlessly above, unmarred by the smoke and lights of civilization. For the first time in years, he felt truly small in the vastness of creation. As he drifted toward sleep, Samuel's mind raced with the implications of what Etzel had told him. Someone was orchestrating an elaborate scheme to either destroy his ranch or force him to sell. The Apache people were being used as pawns, their very survival threatened by men who saw them as nothing more than convenient scapegoats. But who was behind it? Jack Brennan was muscle, not brains. Someone with money and influence was pulling the strings, someone who wanted the Double M ranch badly enough to risk starting a war between settlers and Apache. Samuel's last conscious thought before exhaustion claimed him was a promise to himself and to the people sleeping peacefully around him. Whatever it took, he would find a way to protect both his ranch and this hidden village from the men who threatened them both. The Apache had shown him mercy when they could have killed him. Now he would have to prove himself worthy of that mercy. The next morning, Samuel woke to the sound of children laughing and women preparing the morning meal. The normalcy of it struck him forcefully after a night of troubled dreams about gunfighters and false trails. These were not the savage warriors that sensationalist newspaper stories portrayed, but families trying to survive in an increasingly hostile world. As he sat up, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground, Samuel noticed Etzel approaching with a bowl of what appeared to be cornmeal mush mixed with berries. She had brought fresh water as well, and clean cloths that suggested she intended to check his wound again. "Good morning," she said in English, then added something in Apache that Samuel didn't understand. "Good morning to you, too," Samuel replied, accepting the food gratefully. "What did you say in Apache?" "I said, 'May this day bring wisdom,'" Etzel explained as she knelt beside him. "It is how we greet each new sunrise." Samuel tasted the cornmeal mixture and found it surprisingly good. The berries added a sweet tartness that complemented the corn's earthy flavor. "This is delicious. What kind of berries are these?" "Manzanita berries. We gather them in the mountains when they ripen. They keep well when dried." Etzel gently probed the cut on his forehead, nodding with satisfaction. Healing well. No infection. As she worked, Samuel found himself studying her face more closely than he had the night before. Itzel possessed a quiet beauty that had nothing to do with the painted and powdered faces of the few white women he had known. Her beauty came from intelligence, competence, and an inner strength that reminded him of the desert itself, harsh when necessary, but capable of surprising gentleness. Itzel, Samuel said carefully, how is it that you speak English so well? A shadow crossed her face. I was sent to the government school when I was 8 years old. They cut my hair, took away my clothes, and forbade me to speak Apache. For 6 years, they tried to make me into a white woman. She touched her long hair unconsciously. When I finally returned, some of my people said I was no longer truly Apache. Others said I was a bridge between two worlds. Samuel felt a surge of anger at the injustice she had endured. The government schools were notorious for their brutal attempts to kill the Indian and save the man, as their motto proclaimed. I'm sorry you went through that. Itzel shrugged, but Samuel could see the old pain in her eyes. It taught me about your world. Now I use that knowledge to help protect my people. Sometimes the bridge between worlds must be strong enough to support the weight of both sides. Her words carried a wisdom that humbled Samuel. Here was a young woman who had survived cultural destruction and emerged stronger, using her painful experiences to serve her community. It made his own problems seem small by comparison. The men who came here 3 days ago, Samuel said, did they give you any idea when they might return? They said 1 week. That was 4 days ago now. Itzel's voice carried worry. If they return and find you here, they may think we have made an alliance against them. It could make things worse for everyone. Samuel understood the dilemma. His presence complicated an already dangerous situation. Yet leaving might be equally dangerous if these men were indeed trying to manipulate him into attacking the Apache village. What does your grandmother think should be done? She is torn between wisdom and necessity, Itzel admitted. Wisdom says to trust carefully and slowly. Necessity says we may not have time for careful trust. Before Samuel could respond, a commotion arose from the other side of the village. Warriors were shouting, and Samuel could see people running toward the canyon entrance. Joaquin appeared, his face grim with urgency. Riders coming. He announced in English for Samuel's benefit. 3 men on horses, moving fast. Itzel's face went pale. So soon, she whispered. Samuel stood quickly, his mind racing. Joaquin, listen to me. These men are not my friends. They've been stealing my cattle and making false trails to lead me here. They want to start a war between us. Joaquin studied Samuel's face intently, then spoke rapid Apache to Itzel. She responded just as quickly, and Samuel caught his own name several times in their exchange. She has told me what she learned from you last night. Joaquin said finally, if you speak truly, then these men are enemies to us both. I swear to you, they are enemies. But if they see me here as your prisoner, it might convince them their plan is working. Itzel shook her head. Or it might make them think we have torture information from you. Either way brings danger. The sound of approaching hooves grew louder. Samuel could see dust rising from the canyon entrance, and his heart began to race. Everything depended on the next few minutes. There's another way, Samuel said suddenly. Let me meet them as if I just arrived. I'll pretend I'm still following the trail they laid. I can learn what they really want while keeping your people safe. Joaquin and Itzel exchanged glances. It was a risky plan, but it might be their best chance to gather information while avoiding immediate conflict. If you betray us, Joaquin said quietly, his hand resting on his knife, you will not live to see another sunset. Samuel met his gaze steadily. If I betray you, I won't deserve to see another sunset. Itzel quickly cut his bonds with a small blade she carried in her belt. As Samuel rubbed circulation back into his wrists, she spoke urgently in Apache to several women nearby. Within moments, Samuel's weapons were returned to him, and his horse was brought from where it had been grazing. Remember, Itzel said as he mounted, we are watching. One sign that you mean us harm, and our arrows will find their mark before you can draw breath to shout. Samuel nodded, understanding completely. He spurred his horse toward the canyon entrance, his mind preparing for what might be the performance of his life. Everything he held dear, his ranch, his integrity, and now the lives of these Apache people who had shown him unexpected mercy, hung in the balance. As he rode toward the approaching men, Samuel caught a glimpse of movement in the rocks above. Apache warriors, nearly invisible among the red stone formations, had positioned themselves to observe everything that was about to unfold. He was riding into potential gunfire with enemies ahead and suspicious allies behind. But for the first time in 3 days, Samuel McCready knew exactly what he had to do. Samuel guided his horse through the narrow canyon passage, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Behind him, he could feel the watchful eyes of Apache warriors positioned among the red rocks, ready to rain arrows down on anyone who threatened their village. Ahead, the dust cloud grew larger as 3 riders approached at a steady pace. As the figures emerged from the shimmering heat waves, Samuel recognized Jack Brennan immediately. The scar across the gunfighter's throat stood out like a pale rope against his sun-darkened skin. Beside him rode a heavy-set man whose gold teeth caught the morning light when he smiled, which he did often and without warmth. The third rider was clearly the leader, a well-dressed man in his 50s with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. Samuel had seen that face before, though it took him a moment to place it. Cornelius Whitmore, a land speculator from Phoenix who had been buying up ranches throughout the territory for the past 2 years. Whitmore was known for acquiring property at below-market prices, usually after the owners had suffered mysterious misfortunes that forced them to sell quickly. "Well," Brennan called out as they drew closer, his hand resting casually on his gun, "but if it isn't Samuel McCready following that trail, just like we figured he would." Samuel forced his expression to remain neutral, fighting down the rage that threatened to choke him. These men had manipulated him like a puppet, using his concern for his cattle to lead him into what they hoped would be a deadly confrontation with innocent people. "Brennan," Samuel acknowledged with a curt nod. "Funny meeting you out here in the middle of nowhere. You boys lose some cattle too." The fat man with gold teeth chuckled, a sound like grease spitting in a hot pan. "Cattle? We ain't lost no cattle, friend. We're here on business with Mr. Whitmore." Whitmore urged his horse forward, studying Samuel with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to turning other people's misfortunes into his own profit. "Mr. McCready, isn't it? I've heard good things about your ranch. The Double M has quite a reputation for quality beef." "It's an honest operation," Samuel replied carefully. "We work hard for what we have." "I'm sure you do," Whitmore said smoothly. "Which is why it's such a shame about your recent troubles. Cattle rustling can destroy a ranch faster than drought or disease. It's particularly troubling when the thieves are Indians who view themselves as above the law." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. "I haven't found any evidence that Indians took my cattle." Brennan laughed harshly. "What do you call that trail you've been following? It leads straight into Apache country. Who else would be bold enough to steal from a man like you?" "The trail could have been made by anyone," Samuel said. "Indian ponies aren't the only horses that leave hoof prints." Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem remarkably understanding about having your livelihood stolen, Mr. McCready. Most ranchers would be demanding immediate action against the perpetrators." Samuel realized he was walking a dangerous tightrope. Show too much sympathy for the Apache, and these men would suspect he had learned something that contradicted their narrative. Show too little, and he might find himself pressured into leading an attack on the village. "I believe in being certain before I act," Samuel said. "Innocent people shouldn't suffer for crimes they didn't commit." The fat man spat into the dust. "Innocent? These savages ain't never been innocent. They've been killing and stealing since before any of us was born." Now, Mullins," Whitmore said mildly, though his eyes remained fixed on Samuel. "Mr. McCready is entitled to his opinions, even if they seem somewhat naive given his recent losses." Samuel caught the subtle threat in Whitmore's tone. The land speculator was testing him, probing for weaknesses or hidden loyalties that might interfere with whatever plan they had in mind. "My losses are my concern," Samuel said firmly. "I'll handle them my own way." Brennan shifted in his saddle, his hand moving closer to his gun. "Your way don't seem to be working too well so far. Maybe you need help from men who understand how to deal with Indian problems." "What kind of help?" Samuel asked, though he dreaded the answer. Whitmore smiled, but it didn't reach his cold eyes. "The territorial governor has authorized the formation of civilian militia units to protect ranchers from Indian depredations. Men like Jack here have experience in such matters. For a reasonable fee, they can recover your stolen property and ensure the thieves think twice before targeting you again." Samuel understood perfectly. Whitmore was offering to hire gunfighters to attack the Apache village, using Samuel's stolen cattle as justification. Once the village was destroyed and its people killed or scattered, Whitmore could claim the land for himself or sell it to railroad companies looking for routes through the territory. That's a generous offer, Samuel said carefully, but I prefer to handle my own problems. Mullins laughed again. Handle them? You've been chasing shadows for days while them Apaches probably already butchered your cattle for their cook fires. Time for talking is over. Perhaps, Whitmore said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, but Mr. McCready seems reluctant to face reality. Tell me, Samuel, may I call you Samuel? What would it take to convince you that decisive action is necessary? Samuel felt the weight of Apache eyes watching from the canyon walls above. One wrong word could trigger violence that would destroy everything he was trying to protect. Proof, Samuel said finally. Real evidence that Apache people took my cattle, not just tracks that could have been made by anyone. Brennan's scarred face twisted into a sneer. What kind of proof would satisfy a man who don't want to be satisfied? Before Samuel could answer, a new voice called out from behind him. Maybe the kind of proof that tells the whole truth, instead of just the parts that serve your purposes. Samuel's heart sank as he recognized Eatsel's voice. She rode toward them on a small painted pony, her long black hair flowing behind her like a banner. What was she doing? Her presence here could ruin everything they had planned. Whitmore's eyes lit up with predatory interest. Well, an Apache squaw who speaks English. How convenient. I am Eatsel of the Chiricahua, she said with quiet dignity, ignoring Whitmore's crude term. I come to speak truth about stolen cattle. Brennan's hand dropped to his gun. The only truth we need is that you red devils are thieves and murderers. Jack, Whitmore said sharply, raising a hand to stop his gunman. Let's hear what the young lady has to say. Truth is always welcome, whatever its source. Eatsel guided her pony to a position between Samuel and the three men, her dark eyes fearless despite facing men who could kill her without a moment's hesitation. 3 days ago, she began, men came to our village. They offered money for cattle we might find wandering loose. When our warriors refused, they threatened to bring soldiers to destroy our homes. Mullen's gold teeth glittered as he grinned. Lying comes natural to her kind. One man had a scar across his throat. Eatsel continued, looking directly at Brennan. Another was fat with gold teeth. The leader wore expensive clothes, but had cruel eyes. The accuracy of her description wiped the grin from Mullen's face. Brennan's hand tightened on his gun, and Whitmore's expression darkened with barely controlled anger. Interesting story, Whitmore said coldly. But the word of a savage hardly constitutes reliable evidence. Samuel knew the moment had come to choose sides definitively. Everything in his upbringing and cultural conditioning told him to stand with his own people, regardless of right or wrong. But everything in his heart and conscience demanded that he stand with truth, regardless of the consequences. She's not lying, Samuel said quietly. Is she, Mr. Whitmore? The land speculator's mask of civility finally slipped completely. You've been talking to them. I should have known better than to trust a man who's gone soft on Indians. The only thing I've gone soft on is being manipulated by men who hide behind others to do their dirty work, Samuel replied. You wanted me to attack that village based on false evidence. When I find out who really stole my cattle, I suspect the trail will lead back to you. Brennan drew his gun with practiced speed, but Samuel was already moving. Years of ranch work had given him quick reflexes, and he managed to throw himself sideways off his horse just as the gunfighter's bullet whined through the space where his chest had been. The narrow canyon exploded into chaos. Samuel rolled behind a boulder as Brennan fired again, the bullet striking sparks from the rock inches from his head. Mullins was struggling to draw his own weapon while controlling his spook horse. Whitmore had pulled a small pistol and was looking for a clear shot at either Samuel or Eatsel. Then, the Apache warriors revealed themselves. Like spirits materializing from the red stone itself, they appeared on every ridge and outcropping around the canyon floor. Their arrows were already nocked and drawn, pointed at the three intruders with deadly precision. Drop your weapons, Joaquin's voice echoed from the rocks above. You are surrounded. Brennan swung his gun toward the sound, but before he could fire, an arrow sprouted from the ground between his horse's front hooves. The animal reared in terror, nearly throwing the gunfighter from his saddle. The next arrow finds flesh, Joaquin warned. Whitmore looked around at the warriors positioning themselves for a massacre, his cold calculation finally giving way to fear. This is madness. We're American citizens. You can't threaten us like this. You came to our land with guns and lies, Eatcell called back. You threatened our village with destruction. Who threatens whom? Samuel rose slowly from behind his boulder, his hands visible, but ready to dive for cover again. It's over, Whitmore. Your plan failed. These people know the truth about who's been stealing cattle and trying to start a war. Mullins finally managed to draw his gun, but his hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. We ain't done nothing wrong. We was just riding through. With specific knowledge about stolen cattle and specific threats against Apache people, Samuel said. That's going to be hard to explain to a territorial judge. Brennan had regained control of his horse and was glaring up at the surrounding warriors with hatred burning in his eyes. You think a few arrows scare me? I've killed more Indians than you got people in that village. The words were barely out of his mouth when an arrow sliced through the air, its point coming to rest against the soft skin beneath his chin. The warrior who had fired it stood on a ledge no more than 20 feet away, already knocking another arrow. Speak of killing our people again, the warrior said in clear English, and you will join those you have murdered. Even Brennan, for all his violent experience, couldn't maintain his bravado with an arrowhead pressed against his throat. He sat perfectly still, sweat beading on his scarred forehead. Whitmore tried one last gambit. McCready, you're making a serious mistake. I have influential friends in the territorial government. Cross me, and you'll lose everything you've worked to build. Samuel stepped closer to Whitmore's horse, looking up at the land speculator with disgust. You already tried to take everything I've worked to build. The only mistake I made was not seeing through your scheme sooner. You have no proof I was involved in anything illegal. We have enough proof, Eatcell said, guiding her pony forward. And more will come to light when people investigate your other land acquisitions. How many ranchers have you driven into bankruptcy with stolen cattle and false Indian raids? Whitmore's face went pale as he realized the implications. An investigation into his business practices would reveal a pattern of suspicious acquisitions, each preceded by mysterious misfortunes that befell the previous owners. What do you want? Whitmore asked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Samuel looked up at Joaquin, who had climbed down from his perch and now stood among the rocks with his rifle trained on the three intruders. That depends, Samuel said, on how much value you place on avoiding territorial prison. For the next hour, the canyon became an impromptu courtroom as the truth slowly emerged. Under the threat of Apache arrows and the promise of territorial justice, Mullins proved to have a weak stomach for consequences. He confessed to stealing cattle from multiple ranches on Whitmore's orders, always making trails that led toward Apache territory. Brennan remained sullenly silent, but his presence alone was proof enough of Whitmore's violent intentions. The gunfighter's reputation was well known throughout the territory, and he didn't work cheap or for legitimate purposes. Whitmore himself maintained his innocence as long as possible, but when faced with Mullins' confession and the prospect of investigation by federal marshals, he finally agreed to make restitution. The double M's stolen cattle, it turned out, were being held in a hidden canyon 20 miles to the south, along with livestock taken from 5 other ranches. This doesn't end here, Whitmore warned as he prepared to lead Samuel and several Apache warriors to the hidden cattle. You've made powerful enemies today. No, Samuel replied, checking his rifle before mounting his horse. I've stopped hiding from the enemies I already had. The ride to recover the stolen cattle gave Samuel time to think about everything that had happened. 3 days ago, he had been a simple rancher tracking rustlers. Now he found himself in an alliance with Apache people that would forever change his relationship with both white and Indian communities in the territory. As they rode through the desert, Eatcell brought her pony alongside his horse. You did not have to stand with us, she said quietly. Your own people will not forgive you for choosing Indians over white men. Samuel considered her words carefully. She was probably right about the reaction he would face from his neighbors and the territorial authorities. In a time and place where racial hatred was considered normal and acceptable, his actions would mark him as a traitor to his own kind. Maybe they won't forgive me, Samuel admitted. But I couldn't forgive myself if I let innocent people suffer for crimes they didn't commit. My father always told me that a man's character is measured by what he does when no one is watching. Today, everyone was watching. Eatcell smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since their first meeting. Your father was a wise man. Our people say that the earth remembers every footstep, and the spirits judge us by the path we choose to walk. The hidden canyon where Whitmore's men had been holding the stolen cattle was a marvel of criminal organization. Temporary corrals had been built from deadfall timber, and a small line shack provided shelter for the rustlers who tended the animals. Samuel counted over 200 head of cattle, representing several months of systematic theft from ranches across the territory. As they began the process of sorting the animals by brand and preparing them for the journey home, Samuel realized this was only the beginning of his troubles. Returning the cattle would require cooperation from other ranchers, many of whom would not welcome the involvement of Apache people in recovering their property. "We will help you drive the cattle to their owners," Joaquin said, as if reading Samuel's thoughts. "But our warriors will remain hidden. It is better if white men do not know of Apache involvement." Samuel shook his head. "That's not right. Your people deserve credit for helping recover stolen property. Why should you hide in the shadows while men like Whitmore walk free?" "Because," Eatsell said sadly, "your people see only what they choose to see. If they learn that Apache warriors helped capture white criminals, they will say we must be criminals ourselves. If cattle are returned without Apache involvement, it is justice. With our help, it becomes a conspiracy." The bitter truth of her words struck Samuel like a physical blow. Even when Apache people acted with complete honor and selflessness, the prejudices of white society would twist their actions into something sinister. That evening, as they made camp beside a small stream, Samuel found himself sitting beside Joaquin as the Apache leader cleaned his rifle in the fading light. "Why did you trust me?" Samuel asked. "You could have killed me that first day and avoided all this trouble." Joaquin was quiet for a long moment, carefully working oil into the metal parts of his weapon. "My grandmother Ayana has the gift of seeing into men's hearts," he said finally. "She said yours was divided against itself, but the division was between what you had been taught and what you knew to be true. She believed the truth would win. And if she had been wrong," Joaquin's smile was grim, "then you would have died, and we would have fought Whitmore's gunmen anyway. Sometimes there is no choice but to trust and prepare for the worst." Samuel understood that he had been given a gift beyond measure. These people had risked everything on the hope that one white man might prove worthy of their trust. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. As they settled in for the night, Samuel noticed that the Apache warriors took turns standing guard, their eyes constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. Whitmore and his men had been allowed to leave after confessing to their crimes and revealing the location of the stolen cattle, but there was no guarantee they wouldn't return with reinforcements. "Do you think they'll come back?" Samuel asked Eatsell as she spread her blanket near the small fire. "Whitmore is a businessman," she replied thoughtfully. "He will not risk a fight he cannot win. But he will not forget what happened today. In the future, he will be more careful about his methods." Samuel realized she was right. They had won this battle, but the war between land speculators and indigenous people would continue. Whitmore represented a system that viewed Apache land, culture, and lives as obstacles to be removed rather than rights to be respected. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked. "Will your people be safe in the Hidden Valley?" Eatsell shook her head. "That place is known now. We will have to move again, find another sanctuary where children can grow up learning the old ways." Her voice carried a weariness that spoke of too many forced relocations, too many fresh starts in an ever-shrinking world. "There might be another way," Samuel said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "What if you didn't have to hide anymore?" Eatsell looked at him with curiosity mixed with skepticism. "What do you mean?" Samuel stared into the fire, his thoughts racing. "My ranch covers 30,000 acres. Most of it is grazing land that could support both cattle and traditional Apache life. If your people were willing to work as partners instead of hiding as fugitives, we might be able to create something entirely new." The suggestion hung in the air between them, radical and dangerous. No white rancher in the territory had ever proposed such an arrangement, and Samuel had no idea if it would even be legal under territorial law. "You would share your land with Apache people?" Eatsell asked, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "I would share my land with good people who deserve a chance at peace and prosperity," Samuel corrected. "The fact that you're Apache doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're honest, hardworking, and willing to build something better together. Joaquin, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up from his position by the dying fire. Such a thing has never been tried. The government agents would not allow it. Then, we'll have to convince them it's in everyone's best interest, Samuel said with more confidence than he felt. Apache knowledge of the land, combined with ranching techniques, could create the most successful operation in the territory. Economic success has a way of changing people's minds about what's possible. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, Samuel found himself filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his father's death. For 2 years, he had been simply maintaining what his family had built, adding little and risking less. Now he saw the possibility of creating something genuinely new and important. But first, they had to get the stolen cattle back to their rightful owners and deal with whatever consequences arose from his alliance with Apache people. The territorial authorities would not look kindly on a white rancher who chose Indians over his own people, regardless of the circumstances. Samuel pulled his blanket closer against the desert chill and closed his eyes, trying to push away thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. For tonight, it was enough to know that he had chosen the right side in a conflict between justice and greed. Whatever came next, he would face it with his integrity intact and his conscience clear. The dawn sky painted the desert in shades of rose and gold as Samuel's unlikely alliance began the massive task of driving over 200 head of cattle across 30 miles of rough terrain. The Apache warriors moved through the herd with the fluid grace of born horsemen, their ponies responding to the slightest pressure of knee or heel. Samuel found himself constantly amazed by their skill with animals that clearly trusted them completely. Joaquin had divided his men into 2 groups. Half would help drive the cattle openly, while the others would scout ahead and behind, watching for any sign of Whitmore's return or territorial authorities who might interfere with their mission. It was a precarious balance between visibility and secrecy that reflected the complex realities of life in a territory where Apache people lived in constant fear of arrest or worse. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel worked alongside Eatcell to separate the cattle by brand. Each ranch's animals had to be counted and documented to ensure proper return to their rightful owners. The work was dusty and exhausting, but it gave Samuel opportunities to learn more about the remarkable young woman who had risked everything to tell the truth about Whitmore's scheme. "You said your people will have to move again," Samuel said as they paused to water their horses at a small creek. "How many times have you been forced to relocate?" Eatcell's eyes grew distant as she counted silently. 7 times since I returned from the government school. Each time, we think we have found a place where we can live in peace. Each time, someone decides our presence threatens their plans." Samuel tried to imagine what it would be like to never have a permanent home, to always be looking over your shoulder for the next displacement. His family had owned the same land for 20 years, building their ranch slowly and carefully. The idea of losing it all repeatedly was heartbreaking. "When I was small," Eatcell continued, "my grandmother would tell stories about the old days when our people could travel freely across the land, following the seasons and the game herds. She made it sound like freedom, but I think now it was already becoming exile. The offer I made last night," Samuel said carefully, "about sharing land on my ranch. I want you to know I was serious. But I also understand it might not be practical. There are legal complications I haven't even thought about yet." Eatcell studied his face intently, as if searching for hidden motives or eventual betrayal. "Why would you risk so much for people you barely know?" Samuel considered the question as he watched Apache children playing in the shade of a cottonwood tree while their mothers prepared the midday meal. These weren't the savage warriors depicted in newspaper stories and dime novels. They were families struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile world, displaying the same love, fear, hope, and determination he saw in his own workers and neighbors. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, "and because I think we could build something together that neither of us could accomplish alone." Before Eatcell could respond, one of the scout riders came racing back toward their camp, his pony lathered with sweat and his face tight with concern. He spoke rapidly to Joaquin in Apache, gesturing toward the east with obvious urgency. "What is it?" Samuel asked as Joaquin approached with grim determination. "Soldiers coming. A full patrol, maybe 20 men. They are following our trail." Samuel felt his stomach drop. Military involvement would complicate everything exponentially. Territorial soldiers had standing orders to pursue Apache raiders wherever they were found, and they wouldn't necessarily distinguish between warriors returning stolen cattle and warriors stealing them in the first place. How far away? Samuel asked. 1 hour, maybe less. They are riding hard. Samuel's mind raced through their options. Running would make them look guilty, but staying might result in a massacre. The soldiers would see Apache warriors with a large herd of cattle and draw the obvious, if incorrect, conclusions. We need to separate, Samuel decided. I'll stay with the cattle and meet the patrol as a rancher recovering his stolen property. Your people should disappear before the soldiers arrive. Joaquin shook his head firmly. We will not abandon you to face 20 soldiers alone. If they believe you worked with Apache raiders, they may arrest you or worse. That's a risk I'll have to take. It's better than all of us facing their guns. Itzel stepped forward, her expression thoughtful but determined. There's another way. What if the soldiers found something they were not expecting to find? Both men looked at her with confusion. What if they found a respected white rancher who had been captured by Apache raiders, but managed to escape with information about where the stolen cattle were hidden? Itzel explained. You could claim the Apache forced you to help drive the animals to their hiding place before you broke free. Samuel immediately saw the brilliance of her plan, even as it made his stomach churn. You're asking me to lie about everything that happened, to claim you people were the criminals instead of the heroes. I am asking you to survive, Itzel said gently. Truth is a luxury that sometimes costs more than we can afford to pay. The sound of approaching hoofbeats was getting louder. Samuel could see dust clouds in the distance, confirming that they had very little time to make a decision that would determine all their fates. No, Samuel said finally. I won't build our friendship on a foundation of lies. If we're going to trust each other, it has to start with honesty. Joaquin placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder with what might have been respect or exasperation. Then, you're either the bravest white man I have ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both, Samuel admitted. But I'd rather be a fool who told the truth than a liar who lived safely. As the Apache warriors quickly gathered their weapons and prepared their horses, Samuel found himself alone with Itzel for what might be the last time. She had mounted her painted pony and was ready to disappear into the desert landscape like morning mist. If the soldiers take me, Samuel said, make sure your grandmother knows that her trust wasn't misplaced. I kept faith with your people as long as I could. Itzel leaned down from her saddle and placed her hand briefly on his cheek. Her touch was warm and gentle, but her eyes held a sadness that spoke of too many goodbyes and too many losses. Your father would be proud of the man you have become, she said softly. May the spirits watch over you, Samuel McCready. Then she was gone, disappearing into a landscape that suddenly seemed empty and hostile. Samuel stood alone with over 200 head of cattle and the approaching sound of military horses, wondering if he had just made the last decision of his life. The patrol that emerged from the heat waves consisted of 23 cavalry troopers, led by a young lieutenant, whose clean uniform and nervous demeanor suggested limited field experience. Samuel recognized the type immediately, an Eastern-educated officer whose knowledge of Apache warfare came from textbooks rather than hard experience. You there, the lieutenant called out, spurring his horse forward. State your name and business. Samuel raised his hands peacefully, noting how the soldiers automatically spread out in a combat formation despite facing a single man. Samuel McCready, owner of the Double M Ranch. I am recovering stolen cattle. The lieutenant's eyes swept over the large herd with obvious suspicion. That's a lot of cattle for one man to handle alone. Where are your ranch hands? Back at the ranch, Samuel replied truthfully. I've been tracking these animals for 5 days. Found them hidden in a box canyon about 10 miles south of here. Hidden by whom? The lieutenant demanded. Samuel took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either save or damn him. By men working for Cornelius Whitmore, a land speculator from Phoenix. They were trying to make it look like Apache raiders stole them. The lieutenant's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. Are you claiming that white men stole your cattle and blamed Indians for the theft? That's exactly what I'm claiming, Lieutenant, and I can prove it. For the next hour, Samuel laid out the entire story of Whitmore's scheme, from the false trails leading into Apache territory to the confrontation in the hidden canyon. He left out only the Apache involvement, claiming instead that he had discovered the truth through his own investigation and confronted the thieves alone. The lieutenant, whose name Samuel learned was Morrison, listened with growing amazement and skepticism. The idea that respected businessmen would orchestrate false Indian raids was difficult for the young officer to accept. "This is quite a story, Mr. McCready," Morrison said finally. "But it raises several troubling questions. If this Whitmore person was indeed responsible for the thefts, where is he now? And how did you manage to recover such a large number of cattle without assistance?" Samuel had prepared for these questions, knowing they were the weak points in his improvised story. "Whitmore and his men fled when I confronted them with evidence of their crimes. As for the cattle, they were just being held in temporary corrals. Once I cut the barriers, they followed their natural herding instincts." Morrison clearly remained skeptical, but he also had practical concerns that outweighed his suspicions. "Even if your story is true, I can't allow you to drive these animals across territorial lands without proper documentation of ownership. Each brand will need to be verified, and the rightful owners will have to be notified." "Agreed," Samuel said, relieved that the conversation was moving away from how he had learned the truth about Whitmore's scheme. "I have a list of all the brands represented in the herd, and I know where to find most of the owners." What followed was a tedious process of cattle inspection that lasted until late afternoon. Morrison assigned his men to examine every animal, documenting brands and estimating ages, while Samuel provided what information he could about each ranch represented in the stolen herd. As the soldiers worked, Samuel noticed several of them glancing nervously at the surrounding landscape, clearly uncomfortable with being stationary for so long in territory known for Apache activity. Their tension was understandable, given that military patrols were frequent targets for warriors seeking weapons and horses. "Lieutenant Morrison," Samuel said during a break in the inspection, "your men seem concerned about Apache raids. Has there been recent activity in this area?" Morrison nodded grimly. 3 attacks in the past month, all against military or civilian targets. The Apache have become increasingly bold, probably because they know we don't have enough troops to patrol effectively." Samuel felt a stab of guilt at the irony. Morrison's soldiers were afraid of Apache warriors who were actually trying to help return stolen property, while the real criminals had already escaped without consequence. "What's the army planning to do about the Apache problem?" Samuel asked, though he dreaded the answer. "General Crook is organizing a major campaign to force all Apache onto the reservation permanently," Morrison explained. "We've been ordered to treat any Apache found off reservation land as hostile, regardless of their apparent intentions." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. If General Crook's campaign succeeded, Eatsell and her people would face a choice between prison-like conditions on the reservation or total war against the United States Army. Either option would destroy the community that had shown him such unexpected mercy and wisdom. As the sun began to set, Morrison finally declared the inspection complete. Every animal in the herd had been documented, and arrangements were made to begin returning them to their rightful owners the following morning. "Mr. McCready," Morrison said as his men prepared to make camp nearby, "I'll be sending a full report of this incident to my commanding officer. If your allegations about Mr. Whitmore prove accurate, there will likely be a formal investigation." Samuel nodded, though he doubted any investigation would result in meaningful consequences for men like Whitmore. Territorial politics favored those with money and connections, while justice was often a luxury reserved for people who could afford expensive lawyers. That night, Samuel lay under the stars listening to the sounds of the military camp settling in for sleep. Sentries had been posted around the perimeter, and the horses were hobbled close to the main bivouac area. The precautions were reasonable given the location, but they also served as a constant reminder of the conflicts that divided this land between indigenous peoples and encroaching civilization. Samuel found himself thinking about Eatsell's words regarding truth being a luxury that sometimes cost more than people could afford to pay. He had chosen honesty over safety, but what had that choice accomplished? The Apache people were still fugitives. Whitmore was still free to pursue his schemes elsewhere, and General Crook's campaign would soon make life even more dangerous for any Indian found off the reservation. Perhaps most troubling was the realization that his partnership offered to Joaquin and his people was probably impossible to fulfill. How could he provide sanctuary for Apache families when the military had orders to treat any off-reservation Indians as hostiles? Even if he could convince territorial authorities to approve such an arrangement, General Crook's campaign would override any local agreements. As Samuel finally drifted towards sleep, he was startled by a soft sound near his bedroll. Opening his eyes, he saw a figure crouched beside him in the darkness. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun before he recognized Eatsel's silhouette against the starlit sky. "What are you doing here?" Samuel whispered, acutely aware of the sleeping soldiers less than 50 yards away. "Watching," Eatsel replied softly. "Making sure you survived your meeting with the Bluecoats." Samuel sat up carefully, keeping his movements slow and quiet. "You shouldn't be here. If the sentries see you, they'll start shooting. Your soldiers see only what they expect to see," Eatsel said with quiet confidence. "They watch for war parties, not individual scouts. Besides, we needed to know what they told you about future plans." Samuel realized she had been close enough to hear his conversation with Lieutenant Morrison. "You heard about General Crook's campaign?" Eatsel nodded, her expression grim even in the darkness. "We have known of his plans for weeks. That is why finding a permanent sanctuary has become so urgent for our people. Is that why you're really here? To ask again about my ranch offer?" "Partly," Eatsel admitted, "but also to tell you something important. My grandmother Ayana wishes to meet with you formally, as one leader to another. She believes the time for hiding is ending, and that survival will require new alliances." Samuel felt his pulse quicken. What kind of alliances? The kind that require courage from all parties involved. The kind that risk everything to gain everything. Before Samuel could ask for more details, the sharp whistle of a sentry's challenge echoed across the camp. Someone or something had been spotted moving in the darkness beyond the perimeter. "Apache!" Lieutenant Morrison's voice cracked with tension. "All men to arms." Samuel turned back toward Eatsel, but she had already vanished into the night like smoke dispersing in wind. Around him, the military camp exploded into activity as soldiers grabbed rifles and took defensive positions behind rocks and supply wagons. "Mr. McCready," Morrison called out, "get down behind cover. We may be under attack." Samuel dropped flat beside his bedroll, his mind racing. Had Eatsel been spotted? Were there other Apache nearby who might be mistaken for raiders? The situation was exactly what he had feared when he chose to tell the truth about Whitmore's scheme. For several minutes, the desert night filled with the sounds of nervous soldiers calling challenges and checking sightlines. Samuel could hear Morrison organizing his men and sending scouts to investigate whatever had triggered the initial alert. Finally, a trooper returned to report that tracks had been found near the horse lines, but whoever had made them was long gone. Morrison ordered double guards for the remainder of the night and warned that any further movement outside the perimeter would be met with immediate gunfire. As the camp slowly settled back into uneasy rest, Samuel lay awake staring at the stars and thinking about Eatsel's words. Ayana wanted to meet with him as one leader to another, but what kind of leadership could he possibly offer? He was a rancher with a modest spread and no political influence. What could he do to help Apache people facing the combined might of the United States Army? The answer came to him slowly as he remembered his father's words about building something larger than yourself. Perhaps individual ranchers couldn't influence military policy, but a group of ranchers working together might carry enough economic weight to demand attention from territorial authorities. Samuel began to envision a coalition of property owners who would benefit from peaceful cooperation with Apache communities. Ranchers could provide jobs and legal protection in exchange for Apache knowledge of the land and assistance with livestock management. Mexican farmers could offer agricultural expertise, while Apache craftspeople could provide goods for territorial markets. It was an ambitious dream, probably too ambitious to succeed. But as Samuel finally fell asleep, he found himself planning how such a coalition might be formed and what arguments might convince skeptical neighbors to risk everything for the chance at lasting peace. The next morning brought fresh challenges as the process of returning stolen cattle to their rightful owners began in earnest. Lieutenant Morrison had sent riders to contact the various ranchers whose brands had been identified, and by noon, the first of them began arriving to claim their animals. Samuel watched nervously as neighbors he had known for years examined the recovered cattle and asked pointed questions about how he had managed to locate and retrieve them single-handedly. Most seemed satisfied with his carefully edited version of events, but a few expressed suspicions that he wasn't telling the complete truth. The most difficult conversation came when Tom Bradley, owner of the Circleby Ranch, pulled Samuel aside for a private discussion. "Sam," Bradley said quietly, "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your daddy was one of the most honest men in the territory, and I always figured you took after him. But this story about tracking down Whitmore and his boys all by yourself, it just doesn't add up." Samuel felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "What doesn't add up about it, Tom?" "Well, for starters, Whitmore's got enough hired guns to outfit a small army. What's to stop them from just shooting you and leaving your body for the buzzards? And how'd you manage to drive 200 head of cattle out of Box Canyon without help? Even with good horses, that's more than one man can handle." Bradley's questions were exactly what Samuel had feared. The older rancher knew enough about cattle and criminal operations to spot the holes in Samuel's story. "Sometimes you get lucky," Samuel said lamely, hating himself for the weak deception. Bradley studied his face intently, then glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Sam, if you got mixed up with Apache somehow, you can tell me. I won't judge you for doing what you had to do to survive." The offer of understanding was tempting, but Samuel realized that even partial truth would be dangerous for Eatcell and her people. Bradley was a good man, but he was also a product of his time and culture. Admitting Apache involvement might result in military action against innocent people. "I handled it alone, Tom," Samuel insisted. "That's all there is to say." Bradley nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he remained unconvinced. "All right, Sam, but if you ever need help dealing with problems you can't handle alone, you know where to find me." As Bradley moved away to supervise the loading of his recovered cattle, Samuel felt the weight of isolation settling over him like a heavy blanket. By choosing to protect Eatcell and her people, he had also chosen to cut himself off from the support system that had sustained him through previous difficulties. The irony was painful. He had gained a friendship and respect of Apache people who lived as outcasts from territorial society. But in doing so, he had become an outcast himself from the white community that had shaped his entire life. Lieutenant Morrison approached as the last of the recovered cattle were being claimed by their rightful owners. "Mr. McCready, I'll be returning to Fort Apache to file my report on this incident. Is there anything else you think I should include regarding Mr. Whitmore's activities?" Samuel considered mentioning the threats against Apache villages, then decided such information would only lead to questions he couldn't answer without revealing his sources. "Just that he's probably operating similar schemes throughout the territory," Samuel said. "Other ranchers should be warned to watch for false trails leading toward reservation lands." Morrison nodded and prepared to mount his horse. "I'll pass that along to my superiors. And, Mr. McCready, if you have any more trouble with cattle thieves, send word to the fort immediately. Don't try to handle such matters alone in the future." As the military patrol rode away in a cloud of dust, Samuel found himself truly alone for the first time in days. The stolen cattle had been returned to their owners, the immediate crisis was resolved, and normal life was supposed to resume. But Samuel knew there would be no return to normal life. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, formed alliances that couldn't be undone, and made commitments that demanded fulfillment regardless of the personal cost. As he mounted his horse and began to ride back to his ranch, Samuel's thoughts turned to Ayana's request for a formal meeting. Whatever the Apache leader had in mind, it would likely require more courage than he had ever needed to summon. But it might also offer the chance to build something unprecedented in territorial history, a true partnership between peoples who had been taught to see each other as enemies. The sun climbed higher as Samuel rode through familiar landscape that somehow looked different now, as if he were seeing it through new eyes. This was still his land, his home, his responsibility. But it was also something larger, a place where different peoples might learn to live together in peace and mutual respect. Whether such a dream could survive the harsh realities of territorial politics and racial hatred remained to be seen. But Samuel McCready had decided to find out whatever the consequences might be. Samuel's ranch house sat quiet in the afternoon heat as he approached after 3 days that had changed everything about his understanding of the world around him. The familiar sight of the red-tiled roof and adobe wall should have brought comfort, but instead he felt like a stranger returning to a place that belonged to someone else. The man he used to be before he learned what it meant to choose principle over safety. His foreman, Miguel Hernandez, emerged from the barn as Samuel dismounted near the corral. The weather Mexican had worked for the McCready family for 15 years, starting as a common hand and earning his position through loyalty, skill, and an intuitive understanding of both cattle and men. Patron, Miguel called out, relief evident in his voice. We were beginning to worry. You said you would return yesterday. Samuel unsaddled his horse, taking more time than necessary to avoid Miguel's searching gaze. I found the cattle, Miguel. They're being returned to their owners as we speak. Good news, Miguel said, but his tone suggested he sensed there was more to the story. Did you catch the thieves? In a manner of speaking, Samuel replied evasively. It turned out to be more complicated than simple rustling. Miguel waited patiently for more details, but when none came, he changed the subject. While you were gone, we had visitors. Senior Bradley stopped by yesterday, asking if we had seen any Apache sign recently. He seemed very concerned about raids. Samuel felt his chest tighten. What did you tell him? The truth, that we have seen no Apache warriors on Double M land. But I wonder why he asked such a specific question. Samuel realized that news of his encounter with the military patrol was already spreading among the ranching community. Tom Bradley's suspicions about Apache involvement in the cattle recovery would have grown stronger when he learned that Samuel had been found alone with over 200 head of livestock in territory known for Indian activity. Miguel, Samuel said carefully, what would you say if I told you that not all Apache people are enemies? That some of them might actually be allies if we treated them fairly? The foreman's weathered face creased with confusion. I would say that such thinking could be very dangerous in this territory, Patron. The military and most settlers do not make distinctions between good Indians and bad Indians. But you would make such distinctions? Miguel was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. My grandmother was Opata. Before the Apache came to these lands, our peoples lived here for countless generations. I've seen both kindness and cruelty among all peoples, Mexican, Anglo, and Indian. But wisdom says to judge individuals by their actions, not by their blood. Samuel felt a surge of hope. If Miguel could accept the idea of Apache allies, perhaps other good people could be convinced as well. What if I told you we might have an opportunity to work with Apache people in a partnership that could benefit everyone? I would ask what kind of partnership and what risks it would involve for our people here at the ranch. Before Samuel could explain further, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. For riders were coming up the main trail at a leisurely pace, their relaxed posture suggesting a social visit rather than urgent business. Samuel recognized them immediately. Tom Bradley, Doc Henderson from the territorial capital, Judge William Porter, and Sheriff Jake Morrison. It was an impressive delegation of territorial authority, and their presence at his ranch couldn't be coincidental. Afternoon, Sam, Bradley called out as the group approached. Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. We were in the neighborhood, and thought we'd check on how you're recovering from your cattle troubles. Samuel nodded politely, though his instincts warned him this was no casual visit. Gentlemen, welcome to the Double M. Miguel, could you see to their horses? As the visitors dismounted and gathered in the shade of the ranch house porch, Samuel noticed they were all armed and alert despite their friendly demeanor. Whatever had brought them here was serious enough to warrant precautions. Doc Henderson, a thin man with intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles, spoke first. Samuel, we've been hearing some interesting stories about your recent adventures. Lieutenant Morrison's report raised several questions that we thought you might help us understand. What kind of questions? Samuel asked, settling into a chair and gesturing for his guests to do the same. Judge Porter, a massive man with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, leaned forward with his hands clasped. Questions about how one man managed to track professional cattle thieves to their hideout, confront them successfully, and recover over 200 head of livestock without assistance or casualties. Samuel felt sweat gathering between his shoulder blades. I explained all that to Lieutenant Morrison. The thieves panicked when confronted with evidence of their scheme and fled rather than fight. Sheriff Morrison, a lean man with sharp eyes and graying temples, shook his head. Sam, I've known you since you were a boy. You're tough and smart, but you're not a gunfighter. Men like Jack Brennan don't run from a single rancher, no matter how determined he might be. Maybe they had reasons for avoiding a fight that had nothing to do with fear, Samuel suggested. Such as? Doc Henderson asked. Samuel realized he was being led into a trap of questions that would eventually expose the truth about Apache involvement. These men weren't here for a social visit. They were conducting an interrogation disguised as friendly conversation, such as not wanting to add murder to their list of crimes, Samuel said. Dead men don't pay restitution. Bradley shook his head. That's not how men like Brennan think, Sam. They solve problems with bullets first and worry about consequences later. Judge Porter cleared his throat diplomatically. Samuel, no one here doubts your integrity or your courage. But we're concerned that you may have encountered something out there that you're not telling us about. If you received help from unusual sources, it's important that we know about it. The phrase unusual sources was clearly a euphemism for Apache assistance. Samuel understood that these men had already drawn their conclusions and were simply seeking confirmation. Judge, Samuel said carefully, are you suggesting that I'm lying about what happened? Not lying, Doc Henderson interjected. Perhaps just not telling the complete truth for reasons you consider honorable. Samuel stood and walked to the porch railing, buying time to think while his visitors waited patiently. These were all good men who had known his family for years. They weren't here to arrest him or create trouble. They were here because they were concerned about him and the implications of his actions. Suppose, Samuel said slowly, hypothetically speaking, that I had encountered Apache people who were innocent of any wrongdoing. Would you expect me to report their location to authorities who might harm them without cause? Sheriff Morrison sighed deeply. Sam, you're talking about harboring fugitives. Any Apache,